Hey there, I'm Selena. You might want to grab some popcorn for this one, because what I'm about to tell you is not your average love story. In fact, it's a story of betrayal, regret, and redemption. Let me take you back to when I thought everything was perfect, when I thought I had it all. The perfect relationship, the perfect guy, the perfect future. Alex and I had been together for years. We were inseparable, or at least that's what I thought. Everyone around us always said we were the ideal couple, the couple everyone envied. We were engaged, making plans for our future together. I had my whole life laid out in front of me, and I thought it couldn't get any better. But life has a funny way of throwing curveballs when you least expect them. Alex and I were happy, or at least I thought we were. We spent so much time together, shared everything, and were always the couple everyone looked up to. We had the best dates, the long talks, the laughter that filled the air. But over time, I started to notice small changes in him. Little things that didn't seem right. He'd seem distant at times, like his mind was elsewhere, and I'd catch him looking at his phone a lot more than usual. Whenever I'd ask if something was wrong, he'd brush it off, tell me I was just being paranoid. And honestly, I believed him. After all, everything seemed perfect, didn't it? That's when she came into the picture, Sophia. She was a new colleague at Alex's work, and at first, I didn't think much of it. I mean, she was just a colleague, right? It was all perfectly normal. But slowly, things started to change. I noticed Alex spending more and more time with her. They'd go out for lunch together, stay late at work, and when I'd ask about it, he'd just say it was nothing, nothing to worry about. But something about the way he talked about her started to feel off. He became more secretive, and even when he was with me, he didn't seem fully there. It was like the spark between us started to dim, and all I could think was I losing him? I wish I could say I was blindsided, but deep down, I had already sensed something was off. Looking back, I see all the signs I ignored, the subtle changes in him, the distance. But even then, I didn't want to believe it. One night, Alex sat me down. His eyes were dull, almost apologetic. My heart skipped a beat, and in that moment, I already knew something was wrong. It was like time stopped when he said those words. I've fallen for someone else, Selena. My world shattered in an instant. It wasn't just a casual comment. It was like he'd torn apart everything we had. He told me that she made him feel alive again, that she sparked something inside him that I couldn't anymore. The words cut so deep, it felt like a knife to my chest. After all these years, after everything we shared, he chose her over me. He left me for someone else. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't understand how the man I loved, the man who promised me forever, could just throw it all away for another woman. It didn't make sense. But there it was. Reality slapped me across the face. I was losing him, and I had no idea how to fix it. As the words hung in the air, I felt like the ground beneath me had disappeared. He told me he was in love with Sophia, that he couldn't pretend anymore. He said she made him feel something he hadn't felt in years, something I couldn't give him. I wanted to scream, to ask him how this could happen, how he could just decide to walk away. But the look on his face told me everything I needed to know. He had already made up his mind. He wasn't coming back. It wasn't about me anymore. It was about her. And that hurt more than I could ever put into words. The man I had shared everything with, my dreams, my future, he was leaving me. And for someone who wasn't even in the picture a few months ago. I didn't even know who Sophia was, but suddenly she was the woman who had won his heart. It felt like betrayal on a level I couldn't comprehend. Everything I thought I knew about our relationship, about him, felt like a lie. I remember that night, how I sat there, numb, unable to speak, how he packed his things, and how I just stared, unable to process what was happening. It was as if the world had stopped turning. When he walked out that door, I didn't just lose him. I lost myself. In the days that followed, I was consumed by a storm of emotions. Anger, sadness, confusion. I couldn't sleep. I couldn't eat. I'd replay every moment, every conversation, wondering where I went wrong. Was I not enough? Was I too much? Did he ever really love me? Or was I just a placeholder until someone better came along? My mind raced with questions, none of which had answers. And as the days stretched on, the silence in the apartment felt suffocating. I was alone. I felt abandoned, not just by him, but by my own sense of self. How could I have been so blind to all the signs? Was I that naive? But then, in the midst of all that pain, something strange started to happen. I started to realize that maybe, just maybe, I didn't need him to feel whole. It wasn't easy. I wasn't suddenly healed or empowered. But little by little, I began to remember who I was before Alex. I remembered the things I loved, the goals I had before I got lost in the relationship. And for the first time in what felt like forever, I began to see a glimpse of myself outside of the we. I wasn't just someone's girlfriend anymore. I was Selena, just Selena, and that felt like the first step toward healing. At first, I didn't know what to do with myself. I felt completely lost. There were days when I couldn't even get out of bed, days where I cried until I couldn't remember what it felt like to smile. It was hard, not just losing Alex, but losing the life I thought I had with him. I felt like I was left with nothing. But then something shifted. I don't know exactly when it happened, but one day I looked at the woman in the mirror and I realized something that changed everything. This wasn't the end of my story. It was just a chapter. I couldn't let Alex's betrayal define me. He might have walked out, but that didn't mean my life was over. I wasn't going to let this be the thing that broke me. It wasn't easy, not by a long shot, but something inside me clicked, and I promised myself I would come out of this stronger, not weaker. I started focusing on the things that really mattered, myself. I had spent so many years worrying about being the perfect girlfriend, the perfect fiancée, that I'd forgotten who I really was. I threw myself into my career, poured my energy into making a name for myself, and I actually enjoyed it. I took better care of my health. I started working out, eating right, and it felt good to do something just for me. My happiness became my priority, and with that, something shifted deep inside me. I wasn't just healing, I was transforming. I looked better, I felt better. And little by little, I started to feel powerful again. I was no longer the broken girl Alex left behind. I became the woman I always was, but never really gave the chance to shine. The change didn't happen overnight, of course. It took time, months actually. But with every passing day, I could feel the old Selena coming back. I took up new hobbies I'd always been curious about. I learned how to play the guitar. I took up painting, and I started to travel. I surrounded myself with people who loved me for who I was, not for who I was with. And that made all the difference. I realized I had been so caught up in making a relationship work, I had forgotten to focus on what made me happy. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was thriving. And you know what? The more I grew, the more others started noticing too. People began complimenting me on how I carried myself, confident, radiant, strong. It felt like I was finally becoming the woman I always wanted to be, but never had the courage to be when I was tied to Alex. As for Alex, well, he saw it too. I'm sure of it. I'm sure he noticed the change in me. The texts and messages started coming in, then the calls. But by then, I was someone else. I wasn't the same woman who would drop everything to fix things with him. I wasn't the woman who lived her life on pause, waiting for him to decide. I was worthy of his attention. I had moved on, and though part of me felt vindicated, I was also at peace. I didn't need him anymore, and I couldn't let him back into my life just because he realized he made a mistake. I had become someone he couldn't have anymore. And it wasn't about proving anything to him. It was about proving to myself that I didn't need him to be happy. As the months passed, I learned that Alex's picture-perfect life with Sophia wasn't as perfect as it seemed. It turns out that Sophia, the woman he had chosen over me, wasn't so perfect after all. She started showing her true colors, and I heard the rumors. She was using him for his connections, his money, and his status. Their relationship began to crumble, and Alex, well, he realized the truth too late. He realized the one woman who had truly loved him, truly cared for him, was gone. And that woman, me. His calls started coming more frequently, more desperate. At first, I ignored them. I didn't want to hear it. I didn't want to hear him beg. But then, I did something I hadn't done before. I picked up the phone. He begged me. He told me he was sorry, that he was an idiot, and that he wanted to come back. He said he was miserable without me. But here's the thing, he wasn't apologizing for me. He was apologizing for himself, for losing the one person who truly understood him. I wasn't the same Selena anymore. I wasn't the woman who would forgive him just because he finally came to his senses. I had learned to forgive myself for letting him go, and that was all I needed. I wasn't angry, but I wasn't going to let him back into my life either. It wasn't easy seeing him again after everything that had happened. When Alex reached out to me, I felt a mix of emotions, shock, anger, but mostly indifference. I hadn't heard from him in months, not after I'd cut off contact. And yet, here he was standing in front of me, apologizing for everything. He said he realized what a fool he had been, how much he regretted losing me. His words were like a broken record, repeating the same apology over and over again. He told me he had made a huge mistake, that he had been blinded by everything with Sophia, and that now all he wanted was to come back. He begged me, almost pleading for another chance, another shot at what we once had. I'll be honest, hearing him say all that made me feel something. But it wasn't what I thought it would be. There was no rush of emotion, no desire to forgive him and pick up where we left off. Instead, I felt calm, like I was hearing a stranger speak to me. The woman I was then, vulnerable and desperate to make things work, wasn't the same as the woman I had become. I had worked so hard to build my life, to create a future that wasn't tied to his mistakes. I had done the work to heal, and to see him now, begging me to fix what he had broken, just felt hollow. I listened to him, not out of a need for closure, but simply because I wanted to hear what he had to say. And as he spoke, I felt nothing but peace. I realized, as he continued apologizing, that I didn't need to be validated by him. I didn't need his apology to heal. I didn't need him at all. The truth was, I had moved on emotionally, mentally, and physically. The Selena he once knew was long gone. I was no longer the woman who would sacrifice my happiness for someone who had left me, for another. I had taken back my power. I looked at him, and for the first time, I didn't feel anger or betrayal. I simply felt free. I told him, "Alex, I'm glad you figured things out, but I've moved on. I don't need to go back to what we had. I've learned so much, and I'm in a better place now. I'm happy, and I've learned to love myself. I wish you the best, but I can't go backward." I didn't say it with bitterness. I didn't say it with anger. I said it with peace, because that's all I felt in that moment, peace. And that was it. That was the final twist. The man who had once broken me, who had made me feel unworthy, was now the one left with regret. I was in control of my life now, not him. He could beg all he wanted, but the reality was he had lost me, and there was no going back. As I walked away from that moment, I felt a sense of empowerment I had never felt before. I had learned the hardest lesson of all, that true happiness comes from within, not from someone else. I had spent too many years thinking I needed someone to complete me, to validate me, but now I was whole on my own. I guess sometimes we need to go through the toughest storms to become the person we were meant to be. I'm not the same woman who was heartbroken over Alex. I'm not the same woman who believed love meant sacrifice and self-doubt. Now, I love myself first, and that's enough. And while Alex may have begged for my forgiveness, I didn't need to forgive him. I forgave myself for staying too long, for allowing someone else to control my happiness, and for not realizing sooner that I was enough all along. So here I am, moving forward. The future is wide open, and I'm ready for whatever comes next. I'm focused on myself, on my growth, and on my happiness. And you know what? That's all I need.